Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Star Wars Lads for this week's live Q&A. Hopefully you're all having a great week so far. We're going to be taking your guys' questions throughout the rest of the night and talking about a few other short news stories this week. Before we do so, make sure you're hitting that like button. It does really help out our channel. More people watching right now that have liked, so make sure you do hit that like button. Also, subscribe to the channel if you're new, if you're watching on replay, if you're just discovering us for the first time. We do this every single week, every Tuesday. So make sure you subscribe so you can join us every week if you like these lives. And make sure you check out our other content, shorts, videos, polls, all that type of stuff on the channel. If you're interested in all forms of Star Wars content, you can find it here on Star Wars Lads. So, the last few weeks, we have been posting a lot of our end of the year wrap up stuff. We did have our stream discussing the final books of the year. We also posted a clipped out shorter video version of that. So, if you want to check that out, you can check out that list, our ranking of all the books of 2025. You can also check out our ranking of the TV shows of 2025 up on the channel as well. And we do have coming for you all what we discussed last week, clipped out as a video this week with the preview of 2026, which is a big year in Star Wars. We do have a few more things for 2026 to discuss this week, including games, which next year looks to be a 2-game year for Star Wars, which will be one of our first 2-game years in a long time. So, looking forward to seeing how the quality of those games turn out, and kind of different games for Star Wars next year, not the usual Star Wars fare. So looking forward to seeing how that all turns out. But of course, we are kind of back to our Q&A format. We've taken a little break from that for the last few weeks to do our end of the year wrap up stuff, but we're back to that format as we get back to a little shorter show tonight. Will be an hour and a half, depending on how many questions we're getting, and it will be specifically almost entirely your guys' questions driving the stream. So make sure you're sending in those questions. Super chat does get you guaranteed on the stream. It also does support our channel, which is always really appreciated. If you would not, if you're not subscribed to our Patreon or YouTube membership programs, you can check them out. You can also get priority chat access if you're a member there. So check out those programs, see if there's a tier that's right for you. You will get priority chat for the entire month you're subscribed. So make sure you look into that and you will get your priority chat access. We will be doing our typical chat rules, which is 2 questions per person, cycle through, and then going back to the top once we've answered 2 questions per each individual. It's just to get a little bit of everybody's opinions in here tonight. If you do have something to say about the topic we're currently on, then we will probably bring your question or your comment into our current discussion based on each topic. So that's all the housekeeping. Hopefully, you guys are all having a great week so far. Tomorrow's Christmas Eve, so exciting week for us all. We got Christmas, the New Year's, the year is really wrapping up. 2025 is almost over. It's just hard to believe. It's like we just started it, but 2026 is going to be a really exciting year for Star Wars. All right, let's get into the chats first here, and let's start with Brandon, who says, non-Star Wars question, which 2026 movie are you most excited for based off the trailers? Between Supergirl, Spider-Man, Brand New Day, The Odyssey, and Avatar: The Legend of Aang. I'll pass it over to you first, Sonic. Which one of those 4 are you most excited for?
I would say the one I'm least excited for now is the Avatar movie because the news was that it just got moved to Paramount Plus. It's no longer going to be streaming. No longer going to be in theaters. It's going to be streaming. So I get it. Paramount's trying to make a big bid for Warner Brothers that seemingly is not going to win out, and now they're trying to make people stay on their platform. So that doesn't seem like that's a move that's happening here. It's hilariously sad at this point how mismanaged the Avatar franchise has been with like actually expanding out and growing. Obviously, Legend of Korra, I think probably that first season was the cleanest of it because it was only intended at that point as like a 1 season thing and then and then everything else with the release and everything about that came out weird. Season 2 was so weird. 3 was like, okay, they're really getting into a new level here, but Nickelodeon didn't love teenage aged cartoons in general at that point. A lot of these cartoon shows typically don't, unfortunately. But by season 4, I remember like they just had to put everything on that show on their website to watch there, and They even had to like force an episode to be like a clip episode, which is, that's not just a matter. Usually, it's a matter of budget, but like them being visibly forced into it as the only way they could like actually release the rest of their show is just, yeah, just very frustrating. And then the franchise has been diehard. The original showrunners, were on the Netflix adaptation, and then they left, and that was always like a warning sign for some people. I don't think it's bad per se, but I think a lot of what we're seeing so far for season 2's trailer and all that seems like they're finally kind of working back into what should have been the base level for that show in terms of quality, in terms of characterization. But comics and everything have been going on for a while. And I think this is one that we were all pretty excited to see, see the original gang kind of put together on screen a little older, see what some of their adventures were, some of the things that are hinted at subliminally in Legend of Korra, some things we have no clue about, like people's whereabouts, their fates, and all that. And yeah, I mean, we'll get it, but this it's just disheartening that, for something that was designed to be like, we're gonna take some big swings here. Now it's like you'll just be like paired alongside with the new show as a way to like, prop up this other show. Like, I don't know. That's frustrating. Um, I haven't seen the brand new day trailer, but I am pretty excited for that one. I know it got leaked out there. I know they officially just released the first Doomsday, one of 4 teasers. I didn't get to see it during my Avatar IMAX 3D screening for some reason, but I guess they're put it online, so I don't really have to worry about that now. But yeah, I guess Steve Rogers coming back, which cool in a lot of ways. Was kind of hoping the multiverse era wouldn't depend on him to like him and Tony Stark to like lift it up and make this a direct sequel. I was kind of hoping this would just be another Avenger film where they can show up and play a supporting role. Now it kind of seems like they're gonna have to drag this film forward and this franchise forward again to a nice stable position, which, admittedly I think the last year has been mostly good for them. But yeah, I don't know. Of the ones that I'm like excited for, I am excited for the Odyssey, honestly. I think that's the one, the trailer that came out. I know there's some people being like, "Oh, it doesn't really look accurate and all that." But first of all, the Odyssey is not based on real history. It's a poem, and it's very mythological in nature. It's not necessarily supposed to be 100% accurate. And I think that's what we're kind of going for here. I think at this point, if you're doubting Christopher Nolan with this many years, this many films under his belt to do something like this, that's I get I don't understand that, and I know there's some criticism so far right now, but like, oh, some of the armor looks too perfect, 3D printed. I think that's fair. I think pointing out that like even someone like him can't necessarily rely on the old tried and true methods because it's more expensive. There might not be as many new generation artists involved in the practical making of filmmaking anymore. Yeah, those are things you can criticize him for. But again, we also don't know the context of like that character that looks like he has too perfect armor. It could be like one of the gods or something. It could be like a manifestation that we know seems out of the picture for what they look like. But we'll see how it goes. I am excited for sure. I am hyped for it. I think it's got an all-star cast. Still haven't seen the Colossus. I think we saw like a glimpse of the behind of it, but I want to see more of like the practical stuff that he is still committed to doing because I loved everything about Oppenheimer, and I'm a big fan of like a lot of his 2010 cinematography and what he achieved there. But I think it probably would have to be Dune. Dune Messiah, Dune 3, Dune Part 3. I guess that's what they're calling it. I know there are some big people in the scene right now that are like talking a little bit more about like how they're combining Messiah, maybe stuff with Children of Dune, the third book and the second book. I've read both of those. I'm very curious how that'll land. Messiah was always intended as like, hey, you guys simply misunderstood my story, and I don't think the average audience fully misunderstands Dune. That he's not Paul Atreides is not truly a hero. So I'm very curious how they're going to translate and change things and keep it in that Villeneuve, very grounded, very realistic sci-fi feeling. But yeah, so I think that's the one I'm always going to be most excited for, especially because we've seen part one, part two, and I want to see what he continues to change and adapt for someone who's been a lifelong fan and what my personal feelings will be on that too. I'm probably not one of the people who really enjoys Dune Part 2, but maybe isn't as hyped up as everybody else was because there were certain things I found weird and out there about the book that I really appreciated that kind of get toned back down. But yeah, I would say Messiah, then followed by what we're having in the Odyssey, and then probably a toss up between Doomsday and A Brand New Day. I think I'd have to see a first teaser trailer or find that leaked teaser for A Brand New Day before I make a judgment if that Spider-Man movie is above Doomsday. Because at the end of the day, an Avengers movie is just gonna be so much bigger.
Yeah, I so out of the 4 you listed, I also would say my least anticipated is Legend of Aang, which is unfortunate. Again, like you said, it really has dropped my anticipation level not getting to see it in theaters. Before, it was probably easily a top 10 most anticipated movie of a packed 2026 for me. But then not getting to watch it in theaters is just gonna really kill the vibe. So I don't know, what they're doing with that, but I still believe in the quality of it, and specifically, I was disappointed for the director, Lauren Montgomery, who's done a ton of DC animated movies, and I just really she's a really talented director with animation, and it was gonna be cool to finally get to see her get a theatrical release. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem to be the case. Some of her work, like in DC animation, she's been there in the early days when they were still making good stuff before they started the DC animated universe or whatever the hell they called it at the end that was not very good. Um, that she was doing the like adaptations of the comics. So feel badly for her because she was doing a great job there, and I was excited to see her get a theatrical release. But as for the other three, I would say it's really a toss up for me between Spider-Man and Supergirl. I'm really excited for the fact that we're continuing the DC universe. Personally, having read Woman of Tomorrow, having seen the trailer for Supergirl, it does I wasn't super impressed with the trailer. It kind of just felt like every other James Gunn-esque movie, but with Supergirl in it. Plus, they're going to use the backbone of the plot of Woman of Tomorrow for the emotional hook and some of the beats, but it's definitely not going to be as dark as that story was. Obviously, the trailer doesn't give that indication at all with the tone. And that is a story that's really earned throughout the history of Supergirl, knowing her. I felt like it was going to be a weird one to do for her origin. So if anybody read that story or knows what happens there, they're going to be relying a lot on some things you're connected to from Superman, the movie from last year, to provide the emotional hook for Supergirl. And then they're probably going to weave her story in via the things you're connected to in Superman. And it seems like they are using that hook based on the trailer. But I'm excited for all the other stuff like Lobo. I'm excited to see Supergirl. She's a character that I always have liked and hasn't really gotten her due outside of one horrible movie. So looking forward to seeing what they do with her, hoping the movie can stand on its own 2 feet. I really like the director, Craig Gillespie, super underrated director, did like I, Tonya, did Cruella, which I didn't see, but I heard was pretty good. Finest Hours, missing a couple of his other ones, but I really liked I, Tonya for a movie that has a kind of a dumb name and just is a biopic. I thought it had a lot of flair. The acting was fantastic, really a good movie. So, underrated director, and that's what's giving me a little more excitement for Supergirl, plus just the high of Superman this year than Spider-Man Brand New Day. But if I had to pick the one that's most likely once I do actually see the trailer, once it does start getting the ball rolling, I'm more attached to Spider-Man right now. Obviously, prefer Spider-Man as a character overall across movies and comics to Supergirl. So I would say that's probably number two, Supergirl three there. And the Odyssey's easily number one. That's my number one most anticipated movie the whole year. Anytime Christopher Nolan makes a movie, it's at the top, but especially him making a an ancient Greek epic with the scale of something like the Odyssey. And at my screening too of Avatar, they showed that whole scene of the Trojan horse and everything for the Trojan War. It looked awesome. I can't wait to see it. Hoping it's rated R. I don't know if it is going to be rated R or not because it I think we'll tone it down a little bit, the brutality, if it's rated PG-13, but looks awesome. Can't wait to see The Odyssey. And then, yeah, as for movies you didn't list, Messiah would be my second most anticipated movie of the year. Denis Villeneuve is right there with Christopher Nolan for me. There's 3 directors, and they're all releasing movies next year, but he's right there with Christopher Nolan as directors that, like, anytime they make a movie, it just jumps to the top of my list. And on top of that is the sequel to Dune 1 and 2, which I thought both were excellent. Dune 2 was my favorite movie of last year. So how can you not have Messiah right at the top? And then the other one is the other director that every time he makes a movie, I get super excited for, and that's Robert Eggers. His Werewolf movie is coming out next year, and I can't wait to see how he does that. I loved Nosferatu. Thought he did a great job with vampires. He's done a great job with witches. I cannot wait to see what he does with Werewolf. And then rounding out my other movies that I think you should keep an eye on for next year, obviously Doomsday. That's my number 4. And then Mandalorian and Grogu would probably be number 5 for me right now. It's hard to not put a Star Wars movie at 1 as much as I love Star Wars, but there's just really not too much to be excited for yet, with with Mandalorian and Grogu. I'm anticipating the marketing ramping up. I think it will be Super Bowl around there that they'll start ratcheting up the marketing, but it's just as of now hard to compete with heavyweights from 3 of my favorite working directors, and then obviously Avengers. And I agree, like, I don't really wanna see Captain America back. I have less of a problem with Captain America being back than, like, Iron Man, and my current theory, I really do think they're gonna one of these 4 trailers is gonna be an Iron Man trailer. I think they're bringing Tony back. I really do feel like that's gonna be that. Um, and we're gonna get Tony and Doctor Doom, because we got the Thor one leaked. First one was Captain America. I just feel like the third one's gonna be Iron Man, but I don't really have anything to base that on. I'm just guessing. I hope I'm wrong, but I'm excited for that movie, excited for Mandalorian. The other ones that would be up there, Greta Gerwig's Narnia. I love Narnia. I was a
Mm.
big fan as a kid. Can't wait to see what Greta Gerwig does with Narnia, and I can't wait to see how this whole thing works out, and it could definitely win me back on the Netflix theatrical release train, and hopefully it's a good showcase of what their plans might be for the future of Warner Brothers, because this movie hopefully is worthy of a theatrical release and is worthy of, you know, the excitement that comes with that. So looking forward to that. Disclosure Day as well, Steven Spielberg's new
Mm.
movie. Obviously, amongst those other directors all time, just haven't loved a Steven Spielberg movie in 15 years. So we'll see how this one does. I'm excited for him to return to sci-fi and that type of genre and those types of stories. So really looking forward to that. But you could run down most anticipated movies like all day. There's so many coming out next year. It's crazy how
It's
many
gonna be
good
a
ones.
bloodbath.
It's gonna be awesome. I can't wait. And that's with so many moving out of 2026 to 2027. Like Shrek moved, Spider-Man moved. There's so many that moved out of 26, and we're still gonna have like a solid top 25 movies that we know are coming out next year that are looking really awesome, plus a bunch of ones that will surprise us, obviously, as the year goes on. Another one I do want to give a shout out to as well, Resident Evil with Zach Krieger. Resident Evil hasn't made a good movie ever.
Yeah.
I love the Resident Evil games. If somebody can make a good Resident Evil movie, I think it will be Zach Krieger. He's the one that did Weapons this year, and he did Barbarian a few years ago. So I think he could pull out a good Resident Evil movie finally. We're also getting Scream 7. So I'm excited for both of those as well. But yeah, thanks for the question. It's fun to talk about what's coming next year because there are a lot of awesome movies. So can't wait to see what comes out. We have Critical Thinker said, yeah, really interested in seeing what Nolan does with Odyssey. Yeah, definitely. Can't wait to see what happens there. Got a super chat from Hood Bonker who says, got Reign of the Empire Mask of Fear Volume 1. Today wasn't on my bucket list, but I love Mon Mothma and Andor, and Saw is cool too. Seems like my thing. Well, I really hope you enjoy it. Thank you for the super chat. It is a great book. Both of us had it as our second favorite book of the year, only behind Trials of the Jedi from the High Republic. So I think you're really going to enjoy it if you liked Andor.
Yeah, if you loved Andor, it's just some nice connective tissue, a little bit closer to the prequel world, a little bit more focused on the politics, the galactic warfare of the Clone Wars, and the fallout of that. If you've read any Alexander Freed, like Twilight Company or the Alphabet Squadron trilogy, I think this will also be quite well into your wheelhouse. Otherwise, it's gonna be a fun read. I think this is also probably one of the better depictions ever of Bail Organa too, and why you can see how much of Leia is derived from her adopted father. You can understand a lot more about Mon Mothma and Bail Organa and how they function in Andor season 2, how they function in Rogue One, and it's always fun getting Saw Gerrera just to pop up here and there throughout this Dark Times era, and I'm very curious if he's gonna have a bigger part, especially in the next book. I think it's gonna be set right as the start of Andor time, like 5 years before Rogue One and A New Hope. So yeah, very curious for it. But yeah, that was a standout novel at the beginning of the year. I think this is something that you stick with it and you like commit to the first few chapters, then it just starts flying by, and then all the stuff with the Confederacy and everything and the original characters are just really, really fascinating and really fun to dive into.
Moving back up to the top, we have Critical Thinkers said, "Have you read DCKO number 2 or Absolute Batman 1415 yet?" I'm not. I'm very behind. It's been a really busy last few months, but I'll get to them soon. I did pick them up. They're just sitting here, so gotta read them soon. But what did you think? Has DCKO continued to be a really solid start to the event? And then Critical Thinkers' next question was, what's an underdeveloped aspect of Star Wars world building that you'd want to see them tackle? For examples, economics are always hand waved, political parties are only in one book, really, and not given too much detail, etc. It's a good question. I think I wouldn't want a story about Star Wars economics. I mean, we already kind of have one with Phantom Menace, but I think economics can fit into obviously any political story you're telling. So if you want to do a political thriller, economics become a huge aspect of that type of storytelling, and they are kind of at the backbone of tons of Star Wars stories. They're just not focused on, like you said, always underdeveloped. But can money is at the core of a lot of Star Wars stories. Political parties, I don't know if I would want something about that specifically either. I just enjoy political stories. Like, I don't think you have to create these defined rules. Sometimes with a sci-fi universe, the more amorphous it is, the more room you have to play with characters, the less rigid the structures are. I think that can really provide a lot more interesting storytelling than having everything have to fit into something like that, especially if you try to compare it to like real world stuff, because then that'll never sit right with a group of people. So trying to remove it away from that is the best idea, personally, in my opinion. But I don't know. That's a good question. I have to keep thinking about it. There are, I mean, I guess maybe some of the military minutia, especially within the Empire, and we started to see that fleshed out a little bit more, different ranks, different squads, some types of stuff like that. First Order could really use some type of structural book as well. We've seen, like, Last Order did a good job of kind of explaining the way their hierarchy works in the military, um, but it didn't give us like a full look at the leadership structure. I think stuff like that would be really interesting. I have to keep thinking about that. That's a good question.
Yeah, I mean, I know you mentioned it's only in one book in Bloodline for the politics, and I think that's honestly the most it should be handled, right? You don't really look at Mon Mothma as like, oh, she's part of one party and Bail Organa another, right? Like the whole point is that this is not a American style democracy. This is a legislative democracy, much more European, much more Asian in that focus. And the whole point of all those types of governments in the real world is that they make compromises, they connect with each other, they have alliances. So that's where, like Liam says, the amorphous stuff is a lot more applicable because there are things that might seem seemingly contradictory if you look at them just by their policies, by what they're listed as together, but that's not really why they're together. They're there for different reasons than what we see on paper. So yeah, I think if we look at politics and Star Wars, and this being an American franchise, I think we've already taken the most Americanness of the political structure there, and where it made sense too, especially with everything happening in Bloodline. I think having something in a gridlock in a legislative world would be assembly would be much harder to pull off. But what they did here, right, comparing the centrist and the populist was good. Diving further and further into it, I think kinda undoes just the fact that it's the whole point of that is to say there's gridlock. There's the whole point of that is to say we wanna make Leia a first senator that has more powers closer to the chancellorship, which they were trying to avoid for 30 years, and then obviously that doesn't go to plan. So yeah, I'm not really interested in politics like that, more like species politics, more like trade politics, more stuff like policy wise, I'm fine with. And that stuff, again, we've already seen pretty much handled on the cinema screen with Phantom Menace. Not super well, to be fair, but I'd like it to imagine that's something much more interesting to get in guidebooks and RPGs and those sort of handbooks, and especially in like a book or something if you really want to get into the nitty gritty of it, but I just don't see it being something that's that much fun to read either, unless you're studying Star Wars, So not super interested in the politics of it, right? If I cared about politics like that and how it shapes like galactic consequences, I think Star Trek would probably be a much more interesting read of that situation than Star Wars would be, because at the end of the day, this is a franchise where things kind of go wrong with diplomacy almost every single time. So things have to devolve into more classic archaic fighting and structures and policies and beliefs. So not something I really want to get too into personally either, just other than just like assigning people to roles and responsibilities in the galaxy. Uh, Economics, same thing there. The more nitty-gritty you get into, the more you realize so many things in this franchise wouldn't work as much as you think, and there's no point in doing that in a space fantasy. At the end of the day, there's more space fantasy than sci-fi for me. What I would like to see though, 100%, I really would like to see a lot more of like the pre-hyperspace travel, like the sleeper cell travels and all that. I mean, we see that in fantasy a lot. Like Avatar 3 just came out, where you'll see people who are in cryo sleep and all this and that. But one thing I really loved about reading those old Tales of the Jedi comics back in the day was they really concentrate power within solar systems. It's not really just by planet, by region, by hyperspace path. It's by like a collective organization of things that are, closely able to be traveled to. Solar systems have kind of never had a role in Star Wars other than in Tales of the Jedi. And I just liked how you would have to like say, like, yeah, we've just finally pushed the boundaries of hyperspace, but it's still safer, more practical to do stuff between planets and moons and different astronomical objects that are in a sublight speed distance. And I just want to see what it would be like to kind of transition from maybe a little bit more of a realistic sense of like people have to put their lives on pause, be frozen while others aren't, and then how does that affect decisions? How does that affect behavior? All that through the galaxy, and what is it like kind of going into that transition point? That's something I really would like to see. Uh, Not to bring Star Trek back into it, but Star Trek has a very interesting plot line in Next Generation and in some of the movies about kind of going back in time to seeing how when humans after a post-nuclear world and fallout first discover faster than light and like connect with the Vulcans and stuff, right? And then that's the max it really you get into it, right? And I think Star Wars has the potential with how often the galaxy collapses, how often things go wrong with people with the Force and all that, to kind of just explore a time period where like this is the things that are setting us up into the Republic era, where there's these different power groups, these different kingdoms per se across the galaxy, and what that would look like. How does this newly formed or like infant Jedi Order look like, and how does it operate in between? How does it operate amongst its members who probably would have to be a little bit more alien species heavy than human at this point, because they need to ensure longevity and connections and with their plans and their goals and what they're trying to do to help with the long-term goals of the Republic. I'd love to see stuff like that where there are some technology limitations. It's familiar enough, but you are now kind of pushing stars a little bit more into the alien, a little bit more into that weird, a little bit more into that undefined, by taking away that something that, you know, it's a storytelling convenience to have everybody just be able to only have to spend a couple hours to travel from one end of the galaxy to another, and therefore humans can just live just like everybody else. Versus what something like a species like a Yoda would be like 600, 700 years old. Might maybe they have a little bit more insight into like, yeah, the galaxy wasn't always like this. We had to take a little bit of time on our journeys. We had to plan stuff out. We had to have like missions that would take 20, 30 years, and Jedi Padawans being done and taking the trials by 14 or 15 wasn't something even conceivable at one point in time. So that's kind of what I would like to look into.
HD GameTube TV says, "Do you think the rumors that they will consider turning the Mandalorian movie into a trilogy are true, and what would you make the story be about?" I personally think it wouldn't be a trilogy as in Mando 1, 2, and 3, but rather Mandalorian and Grogu, part 1, Filoni's New Republic as part 3, and they'll make one more in between to bridge the gap. I also think Boba Fett and Bo-Katan should show up in either Mandalorian and Grogu or the New Republic movie. Well, you kind of said the exact same thing I have been thinking, and we have kind of said on this channel before. We did a video covering that specific topic when the rumors came out, I want to say 2 or 3 months ago. But I feel the same way as you. I think they've just restructured what they were originally planning to do as a big finale with the Thrawn plot, all directed by Dave Filoni, into an extended Mandalorian like reboot in the theaters, basically. Personally, I think The Mandalorian Grogu's basically going to be a reboot of the series, not in that it's like erasing plot points or anything, but it's going to be a reintroduction to Mandalorian and Grogu, a reintroduction to the lore around them and who are the other Mandalorians and what's going on with the Empire at this time and who's the Imperial Remnant and who's the big bad like with Thrawn. I wouldn't be shocked if Thrawn is either in the movie or like a post-credit scene or a just the final shot of the movie that he's closing in. I think they're just gonna kind of reintroduce audiences to the storyline that we've followed roughly in The Mandalorian seasons 1 and 2, and then Ahsoka, because A Mandalorian season 3 and Boba Fett kind of go their own direction. They don't necessarily fully connect. It rounds more out into a storyline that is separate from the larger Thrawn plot, and then the odd episode that deals with the Thrawn plot is kind of something that doesn't really mesh well with the rest of the season. Like we had that whole Elia Kane episode. So I think they're going to get back to that, and just it's going to be Din Djarin and Grogu hunting Imperials for Sigourney Weaver, who's now taking the place of Carl Weathers, basically, and going to be a reintroduction to that world and to that timeline and what's going on. I do think the Dave Filoni movie, since they haven't officially canceled it, if I had to guess, that's the third movie. Like you're saying, it's going to bring in Ahsoka, and it's going to bring in all the characters from that series. It's going to bring in, I could see like Ezra and people like that showing up in this movie because Zeb is playing such a big role. I could see it also being kind of a thing they lead up to Hera, Ezra, somebody else like that showing up. The movie will be out most likely before Ahsoka season 2, so I don't think we'll see Ahsoka or Sabine or anybody that will actually spoil that movie. But if it is something like Zeb is standing there talking to Hera and Din Djarin walks up, like I could see scenes like that happening, or Chopper or somebody like that. As for the second movie, I think that's the one that's interesting because if they do a third movie that's really, you know, kind of a condensed version of the Thrawn trilogy, just the Thrawn part of the Thrawn trilogy, the second movie will be interesting to see how they build it up. Like, is it going to be Mandalorian working his way into the Thrawn conflict by the end of the first one? Like, he's bit off more than he can chew. He's found out that he needs to devote himself to the New Republic? Do they bring the other Mandalorians back in? Do they bring the underworld in via Boba Fett? Do they bring it in via a Hondo? Do they bring it in via a Jod Nanawood? How do they connect those? I think that will be kind of your second movie. The world will be opening up, and you're going to see a lot more of the factions start to play as Thrawn builds up his army, as Thrawn builds up, you know, the empire as a force, and in some ways you get your Empire Strikes Back. I know that sequels are always compared to Empire Strikes Back, but the thing that Empire Strikes Back does is let the Empire win. So I think you see in your second movie, the Empire's really ramped up. They're way more powerful than you expected. We know that the Thrawn is going to Dathomir to get his zombie reinforcements at the end of Ahsoka season one. Imagine Ahsoka season two deals with that plot point a bit more, but maybe we've always speculated on the thought that the zombies will be replacing the clones in that story. They're going to be the new clone army that Thrawn gets from the Katana fleet in that trilogy. So you have that reinforcement force. And just like in Dark Force Rising, when the clones are found, you've got this kind of surprise force that nobody's expecting coming in to replace or to take out the New Republic, and that ultimately leads to Thrawn's victory there. So I think we're going to see a lot of those things unfold. But I think the second movie will be it's hard to predict right now, but it's I think it is going to be kind of that world building movie, just as the way the Thrawn trilogy, that was the world building book. The second book's a lot slower. It builds up the Nogri, it builds up Leia as a character more so. It builds up Luke and the Force powers with Jerus Sabaoth. If Balin is playing a role in that, or the Mortis gods are playing a role in that, I think it's going to introduce all those types of plot lines into that story, and it's going to pick up there for a more simplified, more exciting, more epic third movie, less heavy lifting on the third movie. And then the first movie will be more traditional, just like Heir to the Empire is more of a classic Star Wars A New Hope style action, fun adventure movie with other plot points set up. I expect this first one to be mostly an action adventure movie setting up the world. But I'm also still not 100% convinced this is going to end up being a trilogy. I think if they had significant plans for this movie beyond just The Mandalorian and Grogu, I feel like they would be promoting the hell out of it, and they are not really giving it anything. They've hyped up Avengers Doomsday as this giant it's a huge movie, obviously. They're putting a ton of money into it. It's basically going to have to save the Marvel brand, but it is a year away versus Mandalorian is 5 months away, and Mandalorian doesn't have much goodwill going towards it right now, whereas Doomsday, people are at least excited for it, even if they haven't seen stuff. I'm starting to lose a little faith that they have massive plans beyond Mandalorian and Grogu, or they're just waiting to see if Mandalorian and Grogu can be a big hit before they truly go all in. Before, when the news was originally rumored, and when um, the thought and the idea around them like bringing Mandalorian to big screen first really came about, it did feel like they were going to go all in. But now, about 5 months removed, a little over 5 months removed from the film coming out, if they don't really ramp up marketing until about 3 months before the movie comes out, with Doomsday being their big focus, with Mandalorian and Grogu not having too much goodwill towards it currently, it's going to be either something they just rely on surprise box office hit and good critical reviews and maybe good fan reception to keep the series going, or I don't have too much faith that they have the plans we originally expected for them moving forward. But maybe they'll surprise us. Maybe they'll go all in here in the next few weeks, next month or so. But right now, I'm a little concerned that this is kind of a one and done, and let's see how it does, and if it does well, we'll make more type of scenario.
It's weird, right? Like the more we talk about this, the more I want to say like, yeah, no, it's not gonna go anywhere. But sitting at an IMAX 3D screening for Avatar, the thing that got the biggest reception from my crowd was strangely Mandalorian Grogu. And I think the trailer that they play for it definitely has a lot more nicer cuts. It's a little bit more balanced between the action and the cutesiness of Grogu, but strange. It's strange to say, but like there are people who are projecting in the industry that this is going to be a pretty big hit. There are people who are saying like this is something that might not seem on paper the most compelling thing for like the audiences of Mandalorian and Grogu, but that cutesy nature does appeal to kids and stuff. And kids right now are dominating the movie theaters. So having Grogu be a lot more of a central character, which that I think that trailer does really imply he is going to have a lot more autonomy than even what we expected out of him in season three. I think that will get people really invested. And it just so happens to be it's going to be probably the target audience age, if not a little younger, of 12-year-old boys, like George Lucas said. So I think we can see some of that. I do like all your ideas of like what this trilogy could be. Not gonna dismiss it, but from I read an interesting comment, and there's nothing about it that's confirmed and whatnot, but it seems like this movie, yes, it's gonna focus a lot on the Imperial stuff, but we still have Rada the Hutt, and Rada the Hutt is it's very strange because the only reason that this still works with what has been established in the Mandalorian TV show timeline is that there's the whole side story of Book of Boba Fett with the whole twin storyline, and we know that they're on the poster as well, and the whole succession of the Hutts, right after Jabba the Hutt's death and everything in Episode 6. Yeah, are as much as Favreau has said, like, yeah, this is not like any sort of adaptation of any season 4, plots, that's what we all were kind of rumoring, or thinking about it could be. It seems more and more that maybe he is right. Maybe he is just trying to like restart some sort of plot line that just was abandoned in between season 2 and 3, and that would have a if we had actually convinced ourselves to like keep Boba as his own fun character, and not be fully tied into a Mandalorian side story, we probably would have seen maybe a season 3 that deals with the Mandalorian being alone, doing all these missions, and then he gets called in once all the stuff on Tatooine is starting to blow up with the succession and everything. And then we have the teaser of like, oh, Grogu is training, and at some point though they need to connect to each other again, and that's probably where season 4 then would have focused a little bit more and actually spread out a lot more about everything happening on Mandalore. And I know this is more of a theory per se, but structurally that makes so much more sense to me for the story of the characters, for the individuality of Din Djarin as a character to grow and become a little bit more fleshed out without Grogu, what has changed through him, because of Grogu, without actually having Grogu there, right? That was always a big mistake that we all agreed about. As much as we enjoyed a lot of the individual episodes of Book of Boba Fett, once it turned into 2.5 Mandalorian, we're like, oh, okay, this seems convenient. This kind of takes away from what we just saw last December. It just didn't like hit the way it should have. But if we had probably dealt with a story that deals with like some of the other stuff with the other characters that Din Djarin had crossed paths with, and then gone back to a bigger story with Bo-Katan and all that, kind of actually had a little bit more of a natural way for Bo-Katan to fall apart with the rest of the Mandalorian fleet and everything, and kind of just had check-ins with those characters. I think it would have been great for that story, and maybe that's what this is ultimately going to become. This is a way to like recharge that abandoned story idea, give a chance for Boba Fett to at least make up an appearance in a few scenes or something, and you know have that story maybe continue into the second one while still letting this Imperial stuff brew in the backyard. The second film is made, then maybe we do get a little bit more into the Ahsoka adjacent stuff, like you said, with Hera talking to Zeb. Maybe we get to see them already return to the galaxy at that point, kind of tie in some things, what maybe they've learned in the first movie for Grogu, what his powers have reached into, what the Mandalorians are up to. I mean, there are rumors of him being helped out by Death Watch in this film, so there's definitely some sort of continuation there with the season 3 plots, and maybe fleshing out, which is I think very necessary to make a whole planet-wide conquest and re-exploration of the planet make a lot more sense. It's a weird movie. I'm not disagreeing with anybody in the comments. I'm just thinking that maybe they're, instead of taking a season 4 plot per se, maybe they're trying to take ideas that should have been there, and they were maybe storyboarding before Favreau and Filoni kind of split off with him taking Ahsoka, of having this be a true season 3 without Grogu, and now they're like, yeah, we should have stuck with that idea in the first place. Let's do it here. And if this is a huge, huge success, we can continue and have all our other Mandoverse shows kind of filter into a trilogy or a couple extra movies leading into that Filoni movie. If not, maybe there's, a season 4 on the horizon. More recently, more and more we hear Favreau and Filoni rumors being like, yeah, we're not closing the door on like having a season 4 of the show. We might end up having a TV show that becomes a little bit more X Files, a little bit more Twin Peaks, in the sense of like, yes, it's still firmly a TV show, but some of these like bigger arcs, bigger episodes, and places where we really want to show off some of our scale and epicness, maybe we can do that in a movie and get people caught up on like the general stuff of the era, the things that are brewing in the era, and then kind of come back to the stuff that's more pertinent to the individual characters and their arcs. So yeah, I don't know where we're gonna go with this. I think we were all kind of on this train that like a season four, at least half of it's being adapted into a movie. But the more we're starting to hear about this, the more people are like kind of placing the timeline of like the characters and what they should have chronologically been going through as opposed to what actually came out between season two and three. It does seem like they are trying to like backfill some stuff and make just a fun movie that can then elevate their original three seasons put together. And if it works, more movies. If it doesn't, you still make this TV show stronger in hindsight and then give it a little bit more of a re-energizer for a possible season four and maybe an Ahsoka season three if that's on the horizon.
All those are good points too, and I think as HD GameTube says, Mandalorian feels weird. Just don't remember a movie like this where we don't know anything about the story. I would agree with like this close to it. Like we didn't know much about like the Force Awakens story or some of these other ones as well, but like we are so close to this movie coming out. It just does still feels like this movie's 2 years away. Like they just really have not focused on it or talked about it. My theater also did get a big laugh, belly laughs for even some of the more like goofy moments in the Mandalorian and Grogu trailer, like things that would mostly hit for children. You know, there were those like 50-year-old guys who laugh at everything, laughing at them. So, and it did have the like only piece of marketing really I've seen recently for Mandalorian and Grogu was my theater did have the countdown for the IMAX was also Mandalorian and Grogu themed for Avatar. So they are like putting it out there, but like those are the types of things you usually see when the movie's coming out in a month. Like we still haven't seen any real content from this. So it is strange. There's also still the possibility, I don't really want to think about this because it would just be such a waste, but there is the possibility that they do wrap up the Thrawn stuff in Ahsoka season 2. Like that is a possibility. We've talked about a lot on our streams and I don't really love it and the way it's structured, but we'll see how it goes. That Ahsoka season 2 really feels like it's biting off way more than it can chew. Ahsoka season 1 originally was like too simple in its first few episodes. It made it kind of slow and dull. Then it found its perfect footing in episode 4, 5, and 6. Then it had way too much to do and didn't wrap anything up in a satisfying way with 7 and 8. So it was a weirdly structured show, and now they're jumping into a season 2 where the characters are once again split up across the galaxy, and once again they look like they want to tackle two different plot lines that really don't seem to have anything to do with each other between Peridia, Mortis, Ahsoka, Sabine, Balin, which seems to be where Filoni's heart's at, and then the thing that's the vehicle for why this is getting made, which is the connections to the Mandalorian, which is Thrawn, Hera, Ezra, that type of thing, right? So it is just crazy how much they have to do if it was to end in a season 2, and that's why it seems like there has to be more Thrawn because he's been referenced, because he's been teased so much in Mandalorian. I mean, that's where all the buildup for Ahsoka was in Mandalorian and in Rebels, I guess you could say, but like the recent buildup it would be shocking if they wrapped up Thrawn, but there is the possibility that they just say, "Hey, this is, not really working. Let's just wrap it up." That would be really disappointing, but it is the possibility because they are going to deal with Thrawn in this second season, and they've got to do something with him, I guess. I guess they could just have him standing there being like, "Oh, we're building our army and it's coming soon." And the whole season, Ahsoka's just trying to escape Peridia and basically a redo of season 1, but reversed. But yeah, it just doesn't seem very natural the way they've set up these plot lines. And I really did think they were going to just completely exclude Thrawn and New Republic almost entirely from season 2 to focus on Ahsoka, who's the main character of the show, and focus on that plot point and see how that wraps up. Because I feel like one of the two is going to get underchanged. We're either going to get like no real good meaty New Republic stuff to where like we're like, why did we even focus on that at all in this season? Or we're gonna get a really quick, fast wrap up for Ahsoka's story to get back into the main galaxy and then we're going to say, "Oh, that was really interesting, but it ended in 2 episodes." I'm worried about that. I want to see more from Ahsoka's marketing before I get too too nervous, but I'm worried about that from the initial marketing. And HD GameTube says if they wrap up Thrawn in season 2, who would be the villain in the New Republic movie? I would be saying that there would be no New Republic movie, that they're just making Mandalorian and Grogu, and then they're going to see what comes out of that from there. If they wrap up Thrawn, that would be kind of their goal. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. Very excited and nervous and interested for what comes next from the trailer for Mandalorian and Grogu. Going back towards the top here, we have, I think it was Critical Thinker says, canon book Rex for EU fans besides the Zahn Lucino ones. Not really what's directly compatible, but what feels the most reminiscent of it. Well, taking out Zahn and Lucino definitely makes it a lot harder. But I would say, I pulled up my list. Um, I would say the first thing off the bat would be something like Lords of the Sith, uh, Tarkin, those Tarkin's Lucino dang, but like those books that are written right around the merger, the bridge, because they were still written in that similar style and they had a lot of Legends authors. So even something like a New Dawn, which doesn't have any Legends characters, it's all built on Rebels, still is more written like a Legends book than a canon book. And not necessarily in like the impact of the story, right? But it's a little bit darker, it's a little seedier, it's a little more Legends. So I would say that. I would say Alexander Freed, a lot of his stuff, he was also a Legends author, but for comics only. His stuff is a lot more mature, a lot more dense, a little more insular. Like he builds new characters and really creates dynamics and vibes that are specifically him. And I think one thing that's obviously a big difference between Legends and canon is Legends a lot of times, especially later Legends, really took itself a lot more seriously and was a lot more mature. It just there was a lot more violence, a lot more sex, a lot more stuff like that that just was more of an adult level Star Wars. Canon oftentimes reverts a little bit more back to like the safe, fun stories, which has made the floor a lot higher, but the ceiling a lot lower. So I think when you are looking for things with Legends, you kind of want to look in that vein. So I would say check out Alphabet Squadron. It is a little dense, but if you can push through it, like especially the second book is pretty tedious. But if you can push through it, Victory's Price is a great ending. And also on that same vein, Twilight Company, his first book for Battlefront, and it's a pretty underrated one. Nobody really talks about it. It's a good book. It's got some compelling characters, some dark stuff, some violent stuff, and connects to the movies pretty well. So those would be kind of my recs right off the bat. I would say avoid most YA if you don't if you want Legends vibe. Those are pretty far away from most Legends vibe. Um, let's see, scrolling through through my list. Um, but yeah, yeah, I would say the Thrawn stuff. I know you said avoid Zahn and Lucino, but like those are the ones that are gonna feel the most Legends because it's the Zahn and Lucino. So if you, especially Lucino's writing, feels a lot more Legends. But yeah, outside of that, I don't have too many other ones that feel distinctly EU, especially because a lot of these deal with canon only characters. But I would say anything with Freed, and anything near those first 2 years, even in some ways Aftermath feels Legends-esque. It's very obviously gonna contradict tons of Legends plot points and be very, very different, but the way it's written and how seriously it takes itself is a little bit more Legends-esque.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to get that Legends vibe, like Liam said. It's just not something that is gonna happen once you kind of move away from a lot of those like 90s authors who started at the middle or end of Bantam, really helped define the beginning days of Del Rey. And then, some of them, like all of a sudden, have unfortunately passed away, who have been such defining voices. Some of them are just never gonna touch the franchise again. I'm blanking on her name completely, the one behind Republic Commando,
Oh,
uh,
Karen Travis.
Karen Travis, like, she's not gonna ever touch it because she felt so miffed by which George Lucas did in his version of the Clone Wars by having Evan Beale alive and then dead before her version of those events of his death and all that, right? So, yeah, you're not gonna ever get that, and I'd argue that later Legends authors, for the most part, other than people like John Jackson Miller, who are kind of doing like a Kenobi that doesn't have to rely on the tried and true, doesn't have to rely on like what 20, 30 years of writing felt like, has been able to pretty much achieve and kind of get closer to adapting pretty quickly to a canon. With that stuff, those people, they're fine. It's just these people who are like legends, like the people who define all these long running series like New Jedi Order, Legacy Force. We just don't have something like that. And I think that's kind of where when we talk about canon authors who are going to be reminiscent, the only thing we can say reminiscent wise about them is that like, hey, a couple of them actually teamed up and did High Republic, but that's a very different writing style, and there aren't any old Legends authors involved in there. So this is one I can't really say that is like super easy to say once you take out Lucina and Zahn, the only 2, like, all-stars that have, like, been in very crucial stories for both canon and Legends, it becomes very difficult to say. I would say someone who can fit into maybe, like, the Clone Wars multimedia project and stuff like that would probably be Mike Chen with Brotherhood. I think that's probably a pretty good shout. It still allows for stuff like the Battle of Jabim comic and everything to kinda shape how Anakin has changed, the differences between him and Obi-Wan after their first like real separation in the war. He even wrote it saying like, that you can read Stover's version of the Battle Kit in Amodia, or you can take this one. It's really up to you. I think that's probably the closest you'll get to that. If you're talking about more like the feeling and the vibe, dark side stuff, especially the more better written dark side stuff in EU, probably the closest you get is Adam Christopher. I think what he achieved, especially with Shadow of the Sith, is phenomenal stuff. Even if he didn't have a lot to do with the point of view of Vader, what he was exploring with the dark side, with Comp Nor and everything, that's very much Legends heavy concepts that he, especially in those Vader POV chapters, really puts so well together. And detailing stuff with the Royal Guard. It's not quite Crimson Empire, but it's a nice like companion piece to that in what it would be in the mind and the behaviors of a lot of these royal guards, as opposed to them just fighting to the death and trying to rise up, and some of them randomly getting force powers and being trained by Lumia and the like, right? So those two are probably the authors I would suggest. Frida is also a good shout. I think once you start going into the type of EU they like, might be a little bit more like Black Fleet Crisis, where you're talking about ship design and competence, but not necessarily like naval battles. That's where Freed is going to be so good at. So, like Liam said, that Battlefront Twilight Company is a great shout. Inferno Squad is also a good one too. The Battlefront 2 tie-in. I mean, that first one, Twilight Company, that cover for that is so amazing. Even today, I think that's one of the best ever Star Wars covers. Having all these different alien species from the prequels and the sequels and the original trilogy kind of all put together, fighting on the battlefield, very, very symbolically representing what it means to be a rebellion that is not just humans. It's like it's everybody against this very human facing empire that they're against. So yeah, I'd say those are probably the closest I could say, but again, it's until we start getting more of these long running series, or at least getting like 3 or 4 books stitched together into their own little pocket of the universe and shaping different things in the universe that it's not gonna be dependent on animation, that's not gonna be dependent on live action TV shows and movies, you're not gonna get that same feel. You're only gonna get these kind of standalone books that may sort of fit in there or have that same sort of vibe around different concepts and different characterizations.
Next up is Critical Thinker said favorite comic book artist. Off the top of my head, I'd name Ivan Reese, Jason Fabok, Gary Frank, Greg Capullo, Ryan Otley, Jorge Jimenez, and George Perez. Yeah, you've named a lot of the greats. My favorite ever, but he didn't do too many interiors, is Alex Ross. It's just his art is some of the greatest art you'll ever see for any type of character art. It's very Norman Rockwell-esque. I just love it. I love the way he basically paints his pages, which is awesome. But he doesn't do too many interiors because it's so detailed. But the Kingdom Come, one of the greatest comic books of all time. He did the interiors, also the Marvels for Marvel, the kind of like retelling the origin story with through the eyes of this reporter. It's a great story as well. That one he also illustrated. I would say outside of that, George Perez is great. I'm a big fan of 70s, 80s comics, so Neil Adams is up there for me when it comes to superheroes, especially. Neil Adams' Batman is like the Batman I think of the most in my head. I would love to see them do a blue suit for Batman if they do a more comic book traditional one in film. Gary Frank is amazing as well. Greg Capullo, obviously. Ivan Rice is a very underrated one. His Green Lantern stuff is awesome. So definitely up there. Frank Quitely as well. All Star Superman, uh, Batman. A lot of the stuff with Grant Morrison on Batman, pretty awesome too. Looking around at my comics to see who else I'm missing because I'm gonna be missing people. John Byrne, also a classic name. X-Men, Man of Steel, a lot of great stuff there. But Jim Lee, that's another one of the greats of all time. Obviously, Hush, X-Men, runs DC now, so pretty awesome guy too. And then the last one I'll mention, because I could go on forever, is the king of comics himself, Jack Kirby, one of the great artists of all time, co-creator slash creator of almost every major Marvel character, from Captain America in the 40s all the way to Fantastic Four and the early days of the original Marvel, plus creating the Fourth World, which is one of my favorite DC concepts, and Darkseid, who is my top two, top three favorite villains of all time and superheroes. So absolutely love that art. And then for a Star Wars one, Jan Durasima, who did a lot of the best Star Wars art, did Legacy, did I'm blanking on some of the other things she did, but great stuff. And every time I see her work, it really does make me feel those like early days of the EU, or the mid early days of the 2000s EU, like the prequel days. A lot of that stuff is really awesome. So want to give her a shout out as well for a Star Wars specific person.
I think I'm gonna leave that up to you. I think you covered it pretty thoroughly. Comic art's not necessarily something I know the names of, but I can throw in a Phil Noto. I like what he did
Yeah,
on
yeah, good one.
a lot of the Poe Dameron stuff, especially that really gives its own unique flavor and look to, especially a lot of those early canon comics and the sequels.
Yeah, that's a good one too. He's such great cover artist as well. Just some of the most iconic Star Wars art of the last 10 years. So good choice, good choice. Scrolling back down, we've got HD, who says, how do you think Thrawn's portrayal compares between Legends and canon? The big one is that in Legends, he's mostly a villain. In canon, he's more of an anti-hero slash a villain that you can get under the skin of and kind of understand. It depends what portrayal you're looking at. In canon, I know you say the trilogies of books. Specifically, if we're looking at the trilogies of books, he's much more of an anti-hero. He's the POV. You follow him for the most part in the books. You have a lot of perspective um, in the second book, specifically of Thrawn, through the eyes of Thrawn, like looking at Vader, looking at Anakin. In the first book, you have Eli Vanto kind of giving you his appraisal of Thrawn, but then you kind of get shared POVs a little bit more in the third book. And then the Thrawn Ascendancy trilogy is not always through Thrawn's eyes. You get a lot of stuff through his eyes, but a lot of it is just kind of seeing him as an outsider and a lot of other people's perspectives of him. Whereas in Legends, he's kind of this scary, just indomitable force in the books, where similar to Vader and Palpatine, nobody wants to mess with him. Nobody wants to be wrong. Nobody ever wants to mess up under Thrawn, because Thrawn is ruthless and Thrawn is vicious. He is definitely like that more in the Thrawn trilogy. than he ever is really in canon, in the books. But then you have those moments where he's like that in the books. You have those moments where he's willing to do whatever it takes, but you at least understand the person a little bit more because Thrawn is the pure villain in the Thrawn trilogy, whereas he's a shared POV in his trilogies in canon. When it comes to something like Outbound Flight, he's a little bit more brutal, a little bit more vicious, but you still get those moments where he's like learning with George Cardass. He's like starting to become accustomed to our galaxies or main Star Wars galaxies customs and cultures and all of that type of stuff. So there is a little bit more of the humanized Thrawn, and that was written over 10 years after the Thrawn trilogy. So it's when Zahn really started to sit with a lot of the Thrawn stuff and a lot of the lore he laid posthumously for Thrawn in Hand of Thrawn or in stuff they did with the Chiss later on in like New Jedi Order and beyond. So there's a little bit more of the world building around Thrawn versus him just being this scary, unbeatable alien. But that would be kind of the big difference, I would say, between his portrayals. I think Rebels and hopefully what we see in Ahsoka and beyond will get a little bit closer to that more villainous Thrawn because in Rebels he's still measured, but he's ruthless. In the books, he's not as ruthless because you see things through his eyes. So even if he does something you disagree with, you kind of understand where he's coming from. So I'm hoping in Ahsoka we get the truly like villain Thrawn really brought to life.
It's a tough one to say to compare because, like Liam covered pretty well, like he starts off as villainous and he dies, right? And then you're going back and you're filling in all these things, and you're like, no, no, he wasn't actually that bad a villain. He had some reasons for what he's doing, and then Zahn continues to like flesh him out to the point that he becomes like an anti-hero. And then once you get into canon, yeah, you get a little bit of what's there in that original Thrawn novel that is a blend of everything, a little bit more in the later stage. Obviously, this being more POV, you're building them up into the ranks. It's a very xenophobic uh, empire. How does he rise up the ranks and all that? Like those are things that it's hard not to almost like root for him, even if you are seeing some very manipulative tactics and all that. You're like, oh, but I understand his reasons. And that unofficial trilogy fitting in between a lot of what we see in Rebels and how Rebels kind of is a bit of a simplified version, but is still ultimately still pretty good for villain terms of like how good they are, right? Like, yeah, I mean, it's hard not to like almost look at him as like he's a good guy of sorts. Even Ascendancy, I haven't read that. That's where Liam is probably the foremost expert between the two of us on Thrawn on this stuff. Like a lot of that is more about the Chiss themselves and their structure. And yes, he does some things that make him stand out from the Chiss that force him into this sort of exile. And he's not quite so bad either. Once you understand a little bit more about like his choices, you almost feel like the system's against him there. And he loses to other people who would have like helped balance him out in his life, like his brother and everything, when they kind of readapt parts of Outbound Flight in a bit of a throwaway moment there. So yeah, I mean, it's tough to say like how do you compare it because it almost feels like Thrawn liked a lot of what he did with John liked a lot what he did with Thrawn in the original trilogy, the Heir to the Empire trilogy, and then realized, oh my god, this is like such a fascinating character that I didn't realize would jumpstart this whole entire universe, and it's him kind of backtracking. And he gets a chance again in canon, and you can say there's an arc that he's maybe sliding more and more into the villainousness of his character. I mean, there is that scene in Rebels where he literally just has one of those Lothal workers that we see from like season one. In season three, he's on a bike that they've been kind of manipulating them, been kind of messing them up on purpose for the Empire, and he's like, "All right, sit on it. I'm gonna push it all the way to the max, and it explodes and it kills someone." It's not like he doesn't have crazy moments like that that match up with what we see in Heir to the Empire when he just beheads one of these young officers who just isn't like living up to standards and making excuses. Or he is getting to that point, and once he's more under Imperial control, once he's in the Imperial structure. But now it's like we've spent so much time and so many books with Zahn, especially, of the 6 POV that we have in canon versus not too much POV in Legends. Now it's like, okay, are we gonna eventually and I see it all the time, like, is Thrawn gonna, like, die in Ahsoka season 2 or, like, the movie and then be like, "Oh, we have to save the galaxy from the Grisks and everything. It's like now it's almost like we're running into the situation where Zahn has written Thrawn to at least have some compelling reasons for his villainy that you're like, oh, okay. So which direction are we gonna go? We're just gonna simplify and reduce. Like I think a lot of people are seeing Filoni and what he's doing here, going with this very heir to the empire esque characterization, and they're like, I hate it. It's like, well, I understand it, and I think it makes a lot more sense for somebody left alone with a bunch of witches in a different part of the galaxy to get a little bit more meaner and aggressive about what he has to do to survive. But I still see a lot of the Rebels version in there. I mean, it still is Lars Mikkelsen. I think we're gonna see a little more fleshed out properly, and then we get to see a little bit more concrete changes to his character when we see him next. But yeah, it's hard to compare it because it almost feels like he's redrafting the character this time in a little bit more of a chronological sense, but because people have been reading this character since the 90s, it's like, which one do you want? Which one is going to make it out at the end? In some ways, Don's almost written himself into a bit of a corner where he has to have a huge say in what ultimately becomes of Thrawn in Filoni's adaptation of it. Because there'll be people who are like, ah, yes, I want only the villain Thrawn, and then they'll hate anything that's sort of redemptive about him. And then there's going to be people who are like, you made him so villainous that I don't see any reason to believe that this is the same character from all these books that have been written since 2013 by Zahn. It's a weird situation to be in for that character, but yeah, I think the best way to look at it is first version, expansion, and then redraft. That's how I look at Thrawn.
Next up, we have Critical Thinker says in Lucasfilm, if Lucasfilm was sleeping, someone let them write a final Luke, Han, and Leia novel in the EU. Who would you get to write it, and what would you like it to be about? Oh boy, that's a tough one. I mean, off the bat, you would say you would want one of the best to write it, right? But I think there are other people as well who could do kind of a sentimental story to see them off. Maybe better than a Zahn, or better than a Stackpole, or better than a Stover even. Stover was going to be my pick just because he hasn't written too many books. He's only touched those characters once, kind of twice. So I would say I would say Stover because I think he gets at the heart of characters. He really peels layers back. And if it was like that would be kind of the ultimate return for him to Star Wars. Let's say, like they said, yeah, we're gonna do one final EU book to truly wrap up Luke, Han, and Leia's stories. But really, how do you do something like that, right? Like that's where I have a hard time even plotting it or even speculating on a plot is like their stories really could never be over, especially with the way you set up events into knowing what comes later with the one Sith and all that type of stuff building into legacy. It's hard to see them just kind of fading into the sunset. They're going to be involved in the really the story of the galaxy forever. Even if they're retired, they're still going to be involved in the fabric. Like Luke's not just going to go away because he's a Jedi. He's gonna be a part of these things. He's gonna be there. His son's gonna be one of the most prominent Jedi. They're gonna request his help, his wisdom, his aid, right? So I think if you were wrapping it up beyond what Crucible tries to do, it would be this kind of like only focuses on the three of them type of story that is a little bit more sentimental, maybe a little less grand, but really focuses on who they are and why we love them. And in that way, it doesn't need to be sappy, it doesn't need to be over the top, but it needs to find that bridge between like the Luke Skywalker of legend and the Luke Skywalker of the films, and how and why does this guy become who he is, and how does he kind of reconnect to his roots. And I think that way you would take all three of them and really reconnect them back to the versions we fell in love with in the original trilogy. Not that they really leave it in the EU, but like, they become so much more, they're so much older. Find a way to reconnect them and ground them back to what made them in the OT, and deliver something that's more emotional, a little bit more heartwarming, and a little bit more um just reflective. And I think somebody like Stover would be great at that, elevating plot points that maybe don't seem that exciting and turning it into something that's ultimately very reflective. So that would be my pick. But I don't think I would pick some like grand last battle because I don't want them to die. I don't want them to just like go out with like, yeah, we did it. We defeated the one big villain again. And now the galaxy is going to be at peace for as long as we live. Like, I just don't know if that necessarily works. So I think it would have to be something really introspective if you're truly retiring them. But I have a hard time ever seeing them like retire until they die, and I don't want to see them get killed like they kind of do in the sequels. So I would rather just almost skip beyond their last few years. Ultimately, if we were to continue with Legends.
I mean, the key point here is that you're saying Legends timeline, so how the characterizations end up, right? Like I am actually pretty okay with everyone dying in the sequels because it is a big stakes war, and I think them sacrificing themselves for the younger generation actually works for me. Now, do I think they're all equal deaths? No, but I think it works for me. But it's also a canon timeline that's not necessarily dealing with war after war after war after war. It seems like they'll have some Imperial remnants, but then there's gonna at least be 20 years of, like, relative peace and more, like, force-focused battles and conflicts, more political battles, not necessarily as explosive warfare as we see that's constant in Legends, because it almost seems like for the lack of a better term, it's like the New Republic of Legends always has a chip on its shoulder for everything, and then once it starts expanding and reaching out to people, people are, like, kinda turned off by that, and then they have to be like, "Okay, well, we're gonna just do what's necessary and good," and then there's always a crazy Sith pretender and Sith Academy popping up. That's just not something I see canon really diving fully into, like pulling maybe the best of, but still keeping it rather limited and making it a little bit more focused on, a lot of these characters are defined by war. And once the war is done, what happens? Like, are they going to be still be successful in everything they do and all that? I think it's more mature storytelling. Now, do I think it's as well executed? Can't say for sure until we get the 30 years filled out, but I hope that it will be. What I did like about Legends is that everything leading into New Jedi Order really felt right for me. I think New Jedi Order was really good for building up characters, killing off some surprising ones, and then leaving that in a state of, a whole different reworked galaxy where these original trilogy characters have actually finally like left the door open finally for a lot of these characters who are their successors, their children to take over. But, they don't. Unfortunately, Legacy of the Force does not really allow that to happen. Fate of the Jedi is just like entirely different, almost like side series. And then Legacy of the Force, you're dealing with a lot of the same families and everything, and bloodlines and everything has kind of taken over everything about later EU. So knowing the context of that, all right, if we had just ended the EU and post New Jedi Order, I think it would have been pretty cool to see something really expansive and explosive. But then at the same time, something very sentimental would have worked just as well. Now that we do know and we have to consider stuff like Crucible and all that, I think Legends would kind of try to go if an author would try to go for something big of a swing because they're 65, they're 70, and they're still on battlefields, they're still on missions together. It would be something like that, unfortunately. If we had built off of what was there and established in New Jedi Order, I think we would have seen like maybe Legacy of the Force kind of have Han pull away and retire or die peacefully or something like that. And then the next one would have been Luke, and then the next one would have been Leia, or something like that. I think it would have been more like they would take a huge step away from their like a public life like that. But much of the story just does not allow for it because there's this weird contradiction between wanting to deal with the fallout of New Jedi Order storytelling and then being like, no, we need another war, we need another enemy, another conflict. That's unfortunately just the reality of having everything be so book based. You have to keep these original trilogy characters around to keep them super focused if they're not gonna fully transition off to a Jaina or a Jason, which it's a shame. But I know that they took a much bigger role, but by the end, you kind of lose the next generation for the most part, and then you have the Empire come back again. So I just think with how it was written later EU, you would kind of deal with like trying to do a Crucible again, with just this time having like an explosive, like everybody doing everything possible, naval warfare, force warfare, just one big final battle with them sacrificing themselves, right? Like, they're this war won't stop until like we finally are gone from the galaxy, and that's kind of how I look at it, right? Ye Sure, I know what you're saying, they're 50 by the end of New Jedi Order. Yeah, that's great, but I think they don't have to fully retire, but I liked stuff like in the Bantamare where you could be like, "Oh, Mon Mothma's gone. She passed away." Right? Like there's things with like Akbar where he's very old and shriveled, comes out of retirement for New Jedi Order, and then he passes. Right? Like, yeah, I think having these characters have some failures, having the sense of them that could like fall apart and collapse. I'm not saying we want that for our original trilogy characters, but having them kind of start breaking down a bit is something that I don't think the EU ever really wanted to play around with, which sucks because I think at the end of the day, in a galaxy with all these different aliens, you're telling me these humans are still beating up everybody else and doing everything right and outplaying them with their mind and their body. I just never believed that. So yeah, I know what you're saying, critical thinker. I just think that by the end of the day, with how everything was written, including Crucible, the book would be just big and expansive and explosive instead of something like sentimental about them, like reflecting on their lives, reflecting on what they need to do next. What can they do to set up the next generation? Ensure some peace for some time, right? It would just be like, oh, we have to die and sacrifice ourselves and defeat this big enemy, and then we'll have peace for 5 years until our kids have to deal with the next problem.
Next up is Coltrane 2024, and we are starting to run out of time. We've got about 10 minutes or so left in our stream tonight. So if you would like to guarantee a chat on tonight's stream, send in a super chat. It does really help us out. And it guarantees you get on the stream. If you are a member of Patreon or YouTube membership programs or want to become one, we do have priority chat access memberships that you can check out as well. All right, running through these last few as quickly as we can. Coltrane, who says, want to start reading the High Republic in 2026. Any books outside of the adult books, so young adult or middle grade, that you would absolutely recommend I read? Yeah, there are some. I think there are a couple tiers of them, but I'll give you the top tier of the three young adult that I think you 100% have to read are the two books from Phase 2, Path of Deceit and Path of Vengeance. Those go hand in hand with the story of High Republic Phase 2. It's basically the villain's perspective of the story, and the adult books give you the Jedi perspective. So you absolutely have to read those if you're going to enjoy Phase 2 to the fullest. The other one that I think is essential from Phase 1 and 3 is Tears of the Nameless, because it really gives you one of the big MacGuffins of how they defeat or tried to defeat the Nameless by the end in Trials. So if you haven't read that and you go into Trials, there's going to be a big, thing they have in that story that's going to be you're going to have no idea where it came from if you didn't read Tears of the Nameless. So I think that's the tier of like must read these to know the plot of what's going on for outside stuff. I would say the next tier underneath is going to be Into the Dark and Into the Light, as well as A Test of Courage for the middle grade. And that's mostly for character introduction stuff. So Into the Dark introduces the character of Reith Silas, who doesn't play a huge role in Phase 1, and then starts out also not playing a huge role in Phase 3, but Tears of the Nameless, he's a main character, and he kind of is one of the big characters in the second half of Phase 3 of the High Republic. So if you want to know that character, want to know and start your journey with that character, I think you really need to read that book in Into the Dark. Into the Light has some nice wrap up for characters in Into the Dark. That's why I recommend it, but plot wise doesn't really do anything significant or provide any like new MacGuffins or anything for the overall story. It just kind of wraps up a lot of stuff from Into the Dark. And then A Test of Courage is the same thing. That's a middle grade book. It's the very first one. Introduces the character of Vernestra. Vernestra is the one who's in the Acolyte. She's also appears in a bunch of different things throughout the High Republic. Ultimately, a character that doesn't have a significant role in like the adult and young adult stuff, but she does pop up from time to time and ultimately does have, you know, more page time than the average side character, the average character from YA or middle grade. So if you want to know who that character is, I would recommend checking out that book. It's also still my favorite of the middle grade from the High Republic. So I think it's one that's worth reading. But yeah, I would say those are kind of the tiers of YA and middle grade.
Yeah, I think that list is pretty comprehensive. The only one that I would add otherwise is probably Defy the Storm, just because that's where you start to get a lot of introduction with the Blight,
Hmm.
and it's not like it's not introduced in the adult novels and stuff. It's just there are like characters you're like, oh my god, like we just have skimmed over this information that has come from like another character that pops up between young adult and adult. And yeah, overall, Phase 3 just does a lot better job of integrating a lot of the stories between young adult and adult. I mean, Defy the Storm quite literally has you like recapping a lot of the stuff in Eye of the Darkness before you even get to that point. And I know for some people they don't like that, but I think that's a pretty good thing for young adult novel readers who might have, for some reason or another, have only kept up with the young adult only story, and they're like almost hearing tidbits and having these characters age up a year or two. Now they're starting to get a little bit more tied into the overall bigger plot that the Master Jedi and all these politicians and the Republic Defense Force and everyone is kind of dealing with. So, Defy the Storm is pretty important, I would say. It's not super well written, and it is a little heavy on exposition and stuff, but the Blight being a pretty important plot element of everything that we see in Phase 3, I think you kind of have to read it. But that's what I would say. Oh, it's also a sequel of sorts too to the Phase 1 novel from Justina Ireland.
Out of
What
the
is it called?
shadows.
Out of the Shadows. Yeah, and Out of the Shadows is not very good. It's got a part 1, it's got a super long part 2, and then it doesn't even really it feels like they've just cut out stuff. I've been complaining about this for years until we got Defy the Storm. It feels like they finally resolved some things that just almost were supposed to be there for like another young adult novel, and it just didn't happen in Phase 1. So if you want a little bit more backstory for Defy the Storm, read that. Otherwise, I think Defy the Storm kind of just does a good enough job to get you caught up on stuff from Out of the Shadows and like, the power plays that happen there with some political leaders, what the Jedi are discovering, some of the technology of the Nile. And then obviously once we reach Defy the Storm, what the Blight is going to do to everything. So yeah, that's the only other one I would add.
Yeah, I thought about adding that one too, and I think I would agree that like it is the introduction to the blight. It's the first place we see the blight, which is a big plot point in phase 3. So if you want the complete picture, go for it. I think it is just one of those things that it has so many characters. It almost entirely features a cast that's not in anything else we recommended reading. So that's one of the main reasons I didn't add it, because I do think Out of the Shadows is almost essential to read if you read Defy the Storm. Otherwise, the first half of the book, you're going to be like, who are all these people? But if you're okay with that, then you can check out Defy the Storm. But if not, I think you can skip both and then just move into Temptation. But yeah, thanks for that question. And then we got HD GameTube who says, why do you think Ahsoka season 2 is releasing 3 years after season 1? Because that feels like a bit too long for another season of a show. Seems like it took them a bit longer to start filming. Yeah, it's just because of like the current, or what was the streaming era of Hollywood. It just seemed like nobody wanted to take a chance on green lighting more than one season at a time, especially on Disney Plus. We've had this issue. More established TV streamers like Netflix, like Prime, we haven't had this issue quite as much. Like we're already getting Fallout season 2. We on Disney Plus, I think one of the big reasons they've struggled to keep momentum for any show is that they've just refused to put money into anything beyond the initial start for it, good, bad, or otherwise. And the only time they've done it is when they were most successful, and that was Mandalorian season 1 and 2. We got season 2 less than a year after we got season 1. And that's just, I think with the competition around TV, with how expensive streamers are getting, it's more imperative than ever that you get your second season or your third season or whatever season off the ground as quickly as possible. And so I think it's just more of a like COVID money restrictions. Then we had the strikes. We had all these things fluctuating with the industry that Hollywood, especially big studios, were unwilling to really commit to multi-season shows. And in doing so, they've lost a lot of their momentum that they started with. And we've seen the same thing with movies. We used to get sequels immediately after a year, year and a half after, 2 years at most after for franchises that wanted to make more than one movie that weren't going to be like surprise hits. Like with a surprise hit movie, you might get a sequel 3 years later because nobody expected to have that movie in production early. But with superhero movies or with, Star Wars or big franchises that you would expect to be hits, most of the time back in the day, they used to get a second movie going before they released the first movie, just in case it was a huge hit, they could get going on it immediately. They don't do that anymore, or they haven't. We're starting to see a trend towards maybe them starting to do it again because they've realized the time is not on their side. But that is really the main reason. I don't think it had anything to do with like scripting. I don't think it had anything to do with just them trying to figure out whether they needed a season two. I think it was purely like they weren't sure if it was going to be a hit. Numbers were kind of mixed in the middle. It could have been greenlit for season two, could have not been. They waited a little longer. Ultimately, they greenlit the second season, plus Dave Filoni getting a promotion to CCO. He had a lot less time to write and create this whole series and run it and all that. And then on top of that, the changes that's happening with Mandalorian. I think there are a lot of things in front of Ahsoka that's delayed it, but yeah, 3 years is way too long. So hopefully, if we do get a season three, it's a lot quicker turnaround.
Yeah, I mean, all that 100%. And it's just the fact that it wasn't guaranteed. Like we just didn't know, and all the fluctuation that was happening. If we had like a guarantee that this is going to get 2 seasons minimum, maybe three, it would have already been worked on, and they would have started probably even showing us some like set photos and volume photos like by the end of season one, or like at the very last couple weeks to be like, oh, like don't, it might be a wait, but like we are working on it and it'll be here in like 2 years. Three is long, even by like what Star Wars has done on streaming. It's weird. No one's going to deny that. And it's a little concerning that it's got a lower budget, but seemingly going to be bigger and expansive. I'm not quite sure how they're going to play that off, but yeah, and I think we'll see how it plays out. I think part of it is also like maybe they were closer to being ready, but then there was also reorganization with Mandalorian Grogu, what Manaverse is going to shape itself into. Like it's not just the strikes, it's not just streaming rules. It's just the fact that like we are entering into a new phase of Disney Star Wars. This is like if we've completed a Bantam per se, maybe we are entering the Del Rey era of Disney Star Wars, and they want to be a lot more organized and structured about what they're going to do and pull in the elements of characters. That makes sense. But unlike what we saw with Bantam, unlike what we saw with Marvel and their failures with everything that was happening with King and then kind of concluding that character in Loki, it's kind of hard to conclude something that is your most viral and most biggest moneymaker and anything associated with that. You kind of want to just keep pushing along as much as possible, even if it's not super well spoken of compared to like Mando season one and two. It still had really good viewership. It still had something that was growing throughout time. It still has that legacy character sense, and it is the one TV show that is gonna really appeal to people who've been watching since '08 with Clone Wars and Rebels and everything. So, yeah, I think it's just a weirder show in general, and it's had a lot of things in between that happen that are out of its control. And hopefully, this is a strong second season that either truly cleanly concludes it or sets it up for Mandalorian Grogu's sequel, or we are getting a season three. But hopefully, they actually have a little bit more concrete plans, and then they're already working on whatever's next for it.
Critical Thinker says, haven't read Woman of Tomorrow, but as a Tom King hater, I'm worried about the film using his comic as a primary inspiration just because I don't usually like his writing. Well, I think from the trailer, because I have read it, from the trailer, the vibe, it doesn't seem to be following at all. So I think it's going to be just a loose plot structure, not necessarily uh, following the very dark, depressing vibe of Woman of Tomorrow. Personally, I didn't love Woman of Tomorrow. I thought it was pretty good, not great. it is kind of like one of those things. If you've read Tom King, you kind of know the way he's plotting his stories. Um, but there are some really good moments in it for the character of Supergirl. It's just kind of it didn't hold my attention the same way. It's all told through the eyes of this other character who you see in the trailer, the girl who follows her along her journey, and I just wanted it to be a little bit more personal. It's kind of a flashback type of story, which I didn't necessarily love, but there are going to be some good stuff in it. So if they can translate the like core that's really good for Supergirl into the story and make it a little bit more a little less depressing and a little more um, locked in with the vibe of the DCU, I think it can be pretty good. Okay, so we have about maybe one question left for tonight. It's been a great stream, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. We've hit that hour and a half mark, so slowly wrapping up here. Let's go to somebody who we haven't answered very many questions of today. Let's see. Haven't read. Okay. Somebody said they should make a Jar Jar movie. Yeah, I would be at this point. I'd be okay with the Jar Jar movie. Just kidding. I don't want a live action one, but animated one. I'll take that. Um, Hood Bonker. Really like Mara Jade. Yeah, I want to see her show up as well, but we'll see. Probably not. I think one of the more in-depth questions we could answer is Ryan Smith's question. We got Mozo who asks if we think Kit Fisto would be black if if he was a human. Hey, maybe. I don't know.
I
Piccolo from
mean,
Dragon Ball Z vibes.
there
I don't
there
know
have
if I
been
100% see
there are
Piccolo.
characters that are always like people like gravitate to like by their race, by their background, right? And they almost become codified that way. Piccolo is definitely one of them for sure, though.
I don't know if I see Piccolo and Kit Fisto like as the same guy. Like Piccolo's so intense. Kit Fisto's got the smile, like the smirk, you know. But I mean, he could still be black, but I don't know if I see the two of them as the same character. They're
There's that added layer too, because like it's just stunt performers, and I think they're both white in episode 2 and 3. But in Clone Wars, where we get proper Kit Fisto, it's Phil Lamar who is black. So
yeah,
it's like, yeah, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't say he's the same as a Mace Windu per se, right? Mace Windu and Piccolo are probably a lot closer.
yeah,
I've always found a little bit more of like the charming, like very genial, like kind of characterization from Kit Fisto. I mean, yeah, obviously the smile for sure, but even when we seen like 2D Clone Wars and all that, it's like that he's like an energy guy. So if you want to say like he's very much a black character, sure. I just don't think he's in the same ballpark as Mace Windu and what we see with Piccolo, or they're like taking almost to a point like a stereotypical definition of like a black character in a franchise. I think Kit Fisto kind of stands out a little bit more as like he's just charming, and if anything, he's closer to a Lando to me than he is to like
yeah,
a Mace Windu. So I'd put them, if you're gonna put a category of like black characters, but like very different opposite personalities. It's Mace Windu is closer to Piccolo, and then you have a Kit Fisto that is closer to a Lando. Just they ooze charm every minute they're on screen.
yeah. I could see that a little bit more. I think Mace Windu and Piccolo are pretty similar with how intense they are. But I don't know if Mace Windu's got a heart as big as Piccolo's ends up being as well. I don't know. Good question. We got Ryan Smith. I think we should close out with this one. Says, I've asked this question before, but I'm just wondering if anything's changed. What do you think of the current plan? The current plan is for Star Wars film release slate. I'm starting to suspect New Jedi Order will be next. Yeah, that kind of goes into a little news story that I'd pulled up if it was a slower question week, where Daisy Ridley was just in an interview and just kind of was asked about Star Wars, and she was like, "Yeah, I mean, she basically said the same thing she's been saying for 2 years, but this time she was a little bit more like certain about it. They were like, "So you're gonna be can you tell us anything about Star Wars?" And she was like, "Yeah, I'm in it. Like it's happening." She was very definitive about it. It wasn't, wishy washy like we've seen. So I think that is a big development. Now I'm still not convinced we are getting New Jedi Order. I'm still not convinced we are getting a Rey only movie or a Rey specific movie or a Rey movie that takes place 15 years after Rise of Skywalker like we originally getting. I'm a little more convinced that it's going to be changed into taking place closer to Rise of Skywalker around whatever Starfighter's starting. I just don't see why you would jump. If Starfighter's a huge, I know Starfighter's supposed to be a one off, but if it's a huge success, they are going to do sequels. I'm sure they have Ryan Gosling on some type of contract for more than one movie in case it does have some type of successful launch. And it would make sense to really build out that post Rise of Skywalker era with new characters who we can fall in love with before you bring back the old characters and try to, for the lack of a better word, redeem them in the eyes of a lot of people, try to make us fall in love with them again. Because the world itself needs to be built out on top of building the characters. So if you bring in a Ryan Gosling as one of our new POVs, you bring in some other big characters who can help flesh out that time period, and then you bring in Ray and Finn and Poe to be the like Star Wars of it all, the backbone to really add to the ultimate outcomes of the galaxy. I think that would be the way I would structure it. So I'm not 100% convinced it's still the new Jedi Order we know of, but I am starting to get a little bit more convinced that that movie will come out before Dawn of the Jedi, which before I was on the Dawn of the Jedi is going to come out first train. I have no idea what's going on with Dawn of the Jedi. We haven't heard about that movie in like at least a year. I feel like the last time we even heard about it was when James Mangold was going around doing interviews last year for his Bob Dylan movie, and people asked him about it, and he was like, "Yeah, we're working on a script." And that was kind of it. So I don't know. I don't know if that one's happening. Um, but I think right now, obviously, it's Mandalorian and Grogu this year, this coming year, 8 days. But then when it is Starfighter. After that, I think it will be some variation of whatever's coming next in this whole post Rise of Skywalker saga. So I think whether that's Simon Kinberg's stuff, the first movie of that series, or New Jedi Order, it's going to be one of those. But I'm using New Jedi Order as a loose term for whatever they're planning for Rey. I don't know 100% if it's still going to be the exact same thing they pitched originally with 15 years after and all that type of stuff. And by then, hopefully, we've kind of built this world out a little bit. But I'm going to say Kinberg's movie first, his first movie, then Ray, because I think whatever Kinberg's building out with probably new characters is going to build into whatever we're seeing with Ray. But I think that is kind of their plan. I don't know if I want to pin years on it. I think 2027 Celebration is going to be one of the biggest we've ever seen. I think they're going to kind of reveal their next 5 years or so plan for Star Wars because it is the 50th anniversary. I said a few streams ago that I was kind of suspecting slash hoping a little bit of legacy content. And to me, the actors that are the most up for current legacy content for Star Wars are Hayden and Ewan. I wouldn't be shocked if we got some type of like Obi-Wan movie or Clone Wars movie that had the two of them in it. Something like that to kind of be some standalone type of thing that really gets some hype going for the old school because we're not going to see Harrison or Mark Hamill return in any capacity outside of cameos or something like that. So, and Mark Hamill keeps saying he's done with Star Wars, so we'll see. But yeah, I don't think the plans have changed too much, other than we might see a flip flop of post Rise of Skywalker stuff with originally what was going to be Dawn of the Jedi. If Dawn of the Jedi happens, I think it's the earliest is like 2030.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I don't know if I would say Kinberg right away. I think he's the one who's got the most time to develop stuff, but it's we're still in this from the nebulous discussions about it so far. Have been like, hey, we're gonna like let all these standalone movies happen, not exactly in the same year, but all kind of all around. So theoretically, this Rey New Jedi Order could still fit, right? Yes, it's 10 years after where Starfighter is set, but I don't know. I think it could still work. I'm not saying that we're like gonna confuse audiences because I think their original plan, if we are to believe what these leakers and all these little tiny tidbits we are getting the press are to say, it's like they're kind of fine with everything kind of being vague and nebulous for like 10 years and just being like, oh, this happened here and then this happened there and then connected later. Now, does that make sense for a Star Wars fandom that's been obsessed with how like time gaps for characterizations really affects how they look at it? No, not at all, right? So I agree with you 100% on that. Like it's got to be reduced, or you have to make a sequel to Starfighter that gets us much, much closer and builds out a little bit more of the world that then makes sense for Rey's New Jedi Order. Or you have her be a character that takes over the franchise, that kind of sub franchise that comes out of Starfighter. But then I believe we would run into the same issues as like Fantastic Beasts, right? Like that was a pretty fun first movie. And then the second and third, you're trying to deal with Dumbledore and everything else happening in the wizarding world. And you get away from that instead of just saying, like, let's just do a Dumbledore trilogy or something, right? So I'm hoping they avoid that issue and they keep it separate, other than just cameos for these characters, to kind of like set which year it is and like what's happening in the galaxy and the state of the galaxy. Dawn of the Jedi, I do think it's not dead, but I think Mangold is definitely struggling with some things because when it was first announced, it was also going to be connected to Ahsoka in some ways. It's going to be connected to Filoni's New Republic film in some ways. One of them we don't think is actually going to happen the way it was intended, and the other one has definitely been affected by, Filoni taking on a different position, by the 3-year gap and all the reworking to have a Mandalorian movie in theaters, or it's like, what's gonna happen there? So I think that's also really weighing down what he can do. In some ways, he's more untethered than before, which is great, but that sometimes is really hard in a franchise that is very dependent on tropes and very much dependent on things that are familiar for audiences, and there is also a Dawn of the Jedi book and comics that people are gonna immediately compare to, even if it's not super big, so I think he is struggling with that. I think he's struggling with, like, just what exactly the Dawn was gonna mean. How much is it gonna feel like our world? How much is it gonna feel like a Star Wars world? How much of it can be archaic, like a Tales of the Jedi comics? How much is it gonna feel more KOTOR-esque? Like, there are these things that I think just stylistically and conceptually that maybe he's struggling with, and after what he gets to do with, like, a Bob Dylan movie and all that, that's more in his wheelhouse, and maybe he's also just worried after, like, Indiana Jones, it's just that was a big legacy movie, and I still like it quite a bit. I still do think it's better than the 4th movie for me, but not as much as I did, like, 2 years ago. It's a closing gap, so, I don't know, maybe he's a little worried about that, but, yeah, I think we're gonna get the Rey film. I think we get a New Jedi Order film eventually because she is tied down to all these projects. They want her to be in multiple projects. But I think the next Ray film that happens may be a combination of that and the Hunt for Ben Solo ideas that are there to like have them be two proper protagonists instead of just like what we saw in episode 9 and then having to deal with sorta giving some treatment of Finn, sorta giving some treatment, to everybody else, and then realizing that only, negatively affects those characters. Let them have their own standalone movies, let them have their own space, and then have Ray and Redeem Ben Solo maybe pop in and stuff to their stories. So, I think that's what's gonna happen next. I think that hunt for Ben Solo is still going strong in a lot of ways, more so than we got from the Battlefront 2 movement that happened, a while back, or Battlefront 3 movement. So I think I think she's a little too happy in a lot of these interview clips that I'm seeing for her to be like, "Oh, nothing's really happening." I think she is, like, pretty confident about some things. It's just maybe we're actually also just waiting for the official transition from Kathleen Kennedy to the next, lead of Lucasfilm that is rumored, and we got breaking news about it from, like, Vanity Fair or Hollywood Reporter that it's supposed to happen at the end of this year or the beginning of next year, and it seems like it's gonna be beginning of next year. So maybe they have a bunch of announcements for 2026 and what we already think is a big year, and it's just gonna start off with, like, we are entering a new era of Star Wars. This is our new head, and then here are a couple extra projects that we haven't told you about because they're new, they're fresh, and they're gonna fit in a way that you didn't expect with all these other stuff we announced. So maybe that's what's happening here. I'm hoping that's the case. I just don't know if the Kinberg one is quite up next for me because he is confidently working on it, but I don't recall many major updates on it, particularly compared to at least getting something from Daisy on her press tours for other movies.
All right. Well, I think that's going to have to wrap up our stream tonight, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. If you had a question thing on the stream tonight, make sure you join us again for our next stream, which every Tuesday we go live. You can bring your questions and we will answer as many as we can get through in the hour and a half or so we have our show going. Make sure you like the video if you haven't, really does help out our channel. Subscribe if you are new. If you're watching on replay, make sure you join us live every single week. If you haven't checked out our other content, make sure you check out our videos, shorts, and pulls. We have new stuff every week for you guys to check out. Check all that great content on the channel. Make sure you're commenting as well if you're watching on replay, and share this with any other Star Wars fans you know. Thanks so much for watching tonight's stream, everybody, and we will see you all next time.